welcome to an episode of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo Malloy. The film that I will be covering today is Scott Pilgrim versus the World, which is a 2010 romantic action comedy film that's based on the graphic novel series Scott Pilgrim by Bryan Lee O'Malley. The film is directed and co-written by Edgar Wright, who's known for directing films such as Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. The film is also co-written by Michael Bacall, who's known for projects such as 21 Jump Street and Project X. The film stars Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and Chris Evans. Here is the synopsis. As bass player for a garage rock band, Scott Pilgrim, played by Michael Cera, has never had trouble getting a girlfriend. Usually the problem is getting rid of them. But when Ramona Flowers, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, skates into his heart, he finds she has the most troublesome baggage of all, an army of ex-boyfriends who will stop at nothing to eliminate him from her list of suitors. So it premiered at the San Diego Comic-Con on July 22nd, 2010. It was released in theaters on August 13th, 2010. It had a production budget of $85 million. In terms of box office, it made over $49.2 million worldwide. Domestically, it opened at number 5 with $10.6 million. It was beaten by films including The Expendables, Eat, Pray, Love, and The Other Guys. In regards to critical reception, it has a 3.9 rating on Letterboxd. It won 2 Satellite Awards, which were for Best Actor in a Motion Picture Comedy or Musical for Michael Cera, and Best Motion Picture Comedy or Musical. At the time of this recording, it is available to stream on Tubi, Crave, and Stars, and is available on demand, so check your local provider. Okay, let's get into first discovery. So I believe at the time this movie came out, I did see advertisements for this movie. I thought it looked interesting, but I didn't check it out in theaters at the time. But I believe not long after it came out, I believe it was on demand. I think I saw it on TV, and I quite enjoyed it at the time. I thought like it was a fun movie. It's one of those movies where it will either draw you in immediately or it'll turn you off because of the world building, how the film is structured, and all that stuff. And yeah, I found like I was not familiar with the original source material, but I found it was quite out there in regards to its concept. And just rewatching it now, years later, for me, it still holds up. I bought the 4K Blu ray of this movie a few years ago when that came out on Blu ray, and I say it still holds up. Like, it has its flaws, but I would say for the most part, it's enjoyable. So let's get into the highlights. So, the concept is quite out there. I find it's quite unique despite being an adaptation. The fact that you have a guy essentially fighting these evil exes just to get the girl is quite fascinating. Like, and it's not just one person he's fighting multiple people. And honestly, that's just wild. And how like that's set up essentially is structured in a way like a video game, but also mixed with the comic book feel to it. Because when we look at the on-screen titles and the graphics, for example, and every time like when a character like is fighting, they keep showing uh, those movements. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the Batman TV series from the 1960s with Adam West, where every time when they punch and kick someone, it shows like the whiff, bam, pow, like those stuff. But here they do that, but it's modern, obviously. And the flashbacks for this movie they use like an anime style, but like 2D anime style, look like it's hand drawn. I thought that was cute. I guess to resemble the illustrations from the graphic novels, I imagine. And I found it was quite funny, like with the scene transactions, like it's very quick, like it seems very seamless. Like you could, I thought at first, like, oh, is this all happening within the same time frame? But really, how they mesh it together, I guess, to show that it's happening in multiple days. But I thought that was interesting choice. And of course, this being an Edgar Wright movie, this movie has, I would say, a lot of high octane energy from start to finish, like with the music choices, the visuals, the humor, filmmaking style, all of that represents that tone. And yeah, like it's pretty reminiscent if you've seen Edgar Wright's work, such as the Cornetto trilogy, Baby Driver, for example, and also too, in a way, kind of reminds me of Quentin Tarantino's works, where he kind of uses some quick, high octane energy, I would say. And yeah, a point I forgot to mention when I was talking about the concept. It's just wild that with Scott, he's willing to go the extra mile to get Ramona. Because I bet, like anyone else in his position, would not want to put themselves in danger just to get one person. Like, it's not worth the risk. But with Scott Pilgrim, he doesn't mind that because he seems to be immediately drawn to Ramona when he first has that daydream of her despite not meeting. And it seems from there he was so hooked with Ramona and was just willing to go the extra mile to get her, and then all of a sudden has to deal with the exes. And I'm quite surprised that Scott is very capable as a fighter, even though like he is the bass player for the band Sex Bomb, but he has moves. He has the moves. And speaking of moves, the fight scenes overall for me are fantastic. Clearly, they seem to be inspired by a lot of like old school action films, um, such as The Matrix, Kill Bill, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or like Enter the Dragon or Jackie Chan movie. Essentially, like any of those movies that require the use of wire work, where you see people like flying in the air as they're doing their high kicks or sword fighting. Like, if you are a fan of those movies, I would say you'll be a fan of how the fight scenes are structured in this movie. Examples for fight scenes that I enjoyed was when Scott was fighting Lucas and his stunt team at the film set. I thought that was quite hilarious in how essentially Lucas used his stunts doubles to his advantage to trick Scott. That was quite fun. Also, too, when Scott fights Gideon was great because there was a lot of use of, I guess they're like lightsabers in a way, or swords. I'm not quite sure, but I thought that was fun. I guess in a way, kind of like Star Wars, but more extreme with that. And because I found that one to be, I would say, had the most stakes for Scott in regards to fight, because he does lose his life at some point, but was eventually able to get the life back and defeat Gideon at the end. So that was a fun scene. And I loved how like it's not just Scott that gets in on the action. You have Ramona and Knives having their chances to fight. At some point, they fight each other because of due to misunderstandings of Knives believing that Ramona stole Scott from her, essentially, and then eventually they help out to fight Gideon. So that was fun. And then Ramona, she had a chance to fight her ex Roxy. I thought that was an interesting scene with that one, where apparently if you tickle her leg, she gets the shivers. Let's just say that. And the humor for me, it works in this movie. I found was quite sharp and meta at times. Examples for me for that would be when Envy, played by Brie Larson, when she stands randomly in front of her poster as Ramona and Scott are having their conversation at the coffee shop. That was quite funny because the poster was essentially the same pose as hers. And the vegan police, that was just hilarious. That was when Todd was fighting Scott. Todd, he takes a sip of the drink that end up having, I believe it's a 2% milk. I can't remember. And then that's when the vegan police, they quickly show up to say that Todd essentially is in violation and had his powers removed. So that was quite the funny scene. But I do wonder though, I don't think like this would happen in real life. Like if a vegan eats food that's outside of that diet, but that was just hilarious to see. And rewatching this movie now, it's interesting to see like the actors in this movie, like either like amongst their early or mid career and all that stuff. Because, for example, Kieran Culkin, who plays Wallace, who is Scott's roommate, because recently, of course, he's known for being in the TV series Succession. But it's interesting to see him here in this movie. Like, he was quite funny as Scott's roommate, as he tries to, like, have his, chances dating the multiple guys, including Stacy's boyfriend, was quite hilarious. And also, you have Aubrey Plaza as Julie. I found, like, her she has her moments, especially when it came to yelling at Scott was quite fun. And then you have Anna Kendrick as Stacy. I think at the time when I first saw this movie, I recognized her from the Twilight movies, but yeah, she's great here, even though like it's a small role. And then you have Brie Larson as Envy. I thought she was fantastic. I would say it's one of my favorite Brie Larson performances because obviously right now she's known for doing the MCU movies, but this was one of the first movies I saw of hers. I thought she was great with that, especially when it came to that moment when she's performing Black Sheep with the band. I thought that was fun to watch. And yeah, Chris Evans as Lucas. It's funny how he uses like the Clint Eastwood type voice when he speaks, but I guess just to show him being like the high profile actor in this movie, and essentially his character is a douche. So that he was just fun to watch. But yeah, I thought everyone did a great job in this movie. It's just interesting to see them uh, younger, I suppose, in this movie, and obviously right now they've gone on to having respectable careers. The evil exes, they are certainly evil. They put the evil in exes, and they are essentially different versions of being a-holes, essentially. Because you have Michael Patel, not Michael, you have Matthew Patel, because he's the first evil ex that Scott fights. Because clearly he gets very upset when he finds out that Scott did not read his email explaining the situation, which I found that was hilarious. And then, of course, we have Lucas Lee, and then Todd, all about that vegan life, and I think yeah, all of them, yeah, like they are worthy in their own rights, but clearly, yes, they are evil in ways, and luckily, Ramona was able to get away from them as far as possible, even though she feels kind of she regrets maybe how it went down when it came to those breakups, but seeing how the characters played out in this movie, I'm glad she got as far away from them as possible. Sex Bomb. I found that that's a very punk rock type of name for a band that works. Um, yeah, clearly with the bandmates, they have their chemistry like as they're playing their music, and also too behind the scenes as they're practicing and all that stuff. It's funny with Kim; she loves to yell at the beginning, but I guess that's a staple for the band. But I would say it was interesting that once the band signed their deal without Scott, at the party, seeing Kim essentially was she didn't yell her intro because clearly I guess the band are upset with the deal because they're essentially branded at the point as sellouts. But then once Scott tries to defeat Gideon and all that stuff, that's when the band, as you would say, gets their groove back. And I would say with that aspect of the movie, in a way, is it's like a semi commentary on like the music industry and how artists, they're willing to chase fame, but eventually, or unfortunately, have to sell out just to achieve that status and all this stuff. So I thought that was interesting to see. And when it comes to moments, I enjoyed at the beginning, of course, the Universal logo that's in the 8-bit style. I thought that was quite fun to watch. Because I guess it fits because with this movie being structured as a video game and all that stuff. And then later on, when Lucas makes his entrance, the Universal logo plays. I found that was a funny a moment. And also too, when the band Sex Bomb battles the Katayangi twins, if I'm saying that right, I thought that was a fun scene to watch because at least here I find it's nice that the band got to be more involved with the fights and just being in the background. And then how like the use of graphics were used when it shows like the avatars battling each other was fun. And yeah, I imagine like with the VFX stuff took quite a lot of time. And I would say for a movie that came out in 2010, it actually works though. Because I find that there are movies that come out very recent where the VFX looks like garbage. But it seems here that they were able to take their time and all that stuff. So I would say kudos to the VFX team on that. And lastly, I want to point out the ending because I like how, in a way, it's kind of like hopeful, but in ways open ended. Because after Knives recognizes that she cannot be with Scott and all that stuff, I guess Ramona is unsure of her relationship with Scott, so she eventually tries to leave, but then Ramona changes her mind as Scott, tries to share his feelings and all that stuff. But and then they decide to start over as a couple. I found that was quite nice as the ending, and hopefully they're able to work out at the end. So let's get into the lowlight section. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it's one of those movies where you're either gonna get it at first or not. And I think for the average person, this movie may not be for them, especially with the concept essentially being out there, unless if you're familiar with the original source material. And because it reminded me of the quote from the movie Tenant, where the character says, "Don't try to understand it, just feel it." And I feel like with this movie, it's like that. But at least with this movie, you have the general sense in what's happening in terms of Scott having to fight the evil exes to get Ramona. So at least like the central of plot is there, but when it comes to the other stuff, it may be a bit out there. Because like at times, like I guess people confused to be wondering like why do people turn to coins once they're defeated? How come there's a point system and there's powers involved and then there's an evil league? So I think with all that stuff might throw some people off if they don't know that stuff beforehand. But I would say for me, I do not mind that stuff, but I do wonder though why did they turn into coins and all that stuff. But I mean, but the fact that this is supposed to be like a video game, I guess you could understand that point. But I just wanted to throw that out there. And two, I wondered how did the Evil League find out about Scott at the beginning? Because it seemed like before he became serious about Ramona, he got the email from Patel about the situation, but obviously Scott ignored it. So I was wondering, where did they spy on him? I felt that part was just unclear to me. Like they just randomly knew that they had to fight Scott. I don't know. And plus I wondered too, like should they defeated Scott, what was going to happen? Like were they going to fight over Ramona? Or did they just want Ramona to be single for the rest of her life? I don't know. Also too, I found Scott, even though he's the main character, he's quite the jerk, I would say. Because he because he's dating Knives, and it seemed like everyone in the movie felt that Knives was not the one for Scott, and Scott decides to break up with Knives just to be with Ramona. And at some point, he gets upset when Ramona changes her hair color. So I just wondered though, is he selfish just for the sake of, or is it because of what happened with him and Envy when they used to date? She dumped him. I wondered like because of that is why he is the way he is when it comes to relationships. Maybe I'm not sure. I mean, probably all this stuff is mentioned in the graphic novel, but again, I'm not sure. And then lastly, let's talk about Knives. So even though Knives kind of has her redemption towards the last act, she is quite the groupie in this movie. And you could argue that she is a simp in this movie. Because she follows Scott around, well, you could argue, and also the band. So she follows him around like a lost puppy throughout this movie. And after the breakup, she doesn't really get the hint. It keeps following him around. And then at some point, she cuts her hair to resemble Ramona's, or it could have been just a coincidence, but definitely looked the same. So I would say I did felt bad that she got dumped, but at the same time, it was coming. It was coming. But at least she was able to move on, but she did not get the hint beforehand. So let's get into the trivia section. So there were a lot of fun facts I found about this movie. So apparently, the original concept for Scott Pilgrim, I'm assuming this is for the graphic novel. Apparently, it's based around two premises. The first was the idea of what if, after a life of playing fighting games, someone confronted you and you actually had the ability to fight like a Street Fighter character. The second concept came about when Bryan Lee O'Malley was dating his future wife, Hope Larson. When he learned that she dated three different guys named Matthew, O'Malley came up with the idea of the League of Matthews. This idea developed into the League of Evil Exes. Matthew Patel is the only evil ex to keep the name Matthew. I found that's interesting. But yeah, it's funny. I guess they incorporate Street Fighter into this. I'm not familiar. I know of the video games, but to be honest, I know more about the movie that came out with Jean Claude Van Damme, which was not a great movie, but yeah, I would say that's good to know. Also, too, Sex Bomb apparently is a reference to the Nintendo video game Super Mario Bros. 2. The game features an enemy character named Bob Bomb that looks like a small round bomb with a lit fuse, legs, and eyes. An image resembling this character is depicted on the band's kick drum Sex Bomb. Is the name Oh, and then Sex Bomb is the name of a song by the punk rock band Flipper, as well as a hit record by singer Tom Jones. Interesting. So, Edgar Wright apparently told his casting director not to hire any English actors, as this was his first North American film. Satya Baba, if I'm saying that right, who played Matthew Patel, successfully passed the audition with a non English accent. Baba later revealed that he was from London, England. Hmm. So the four castmates that made up the band Sex Bomb spent several weeks learning how to play together as a band. Mark Webber, Alison Pill, and Johnny Simmons had to learn their instruments from scratch, while Michael Cera had to dumb down his bass playing in order to not outshine his bandmates. Alrighty. The 8-bit Universal logo at the beginning of the film was Edgar Wright's idea. It was then designed by his brother Oscar Wright, the concept designer and storyboard artist of the film. The logo seen in the final film was actually on the first draft, was only a first draft. It was not yet considered finished when test screenings began, but audiences reacted positively to it. That was decided that no further work needed to be done. Cool. The film only had the title card at the beginning. It was Tarantino who suggested to Edgar Wright late in the stage of post production that there should be a pre-title credits sequence. Otherwise, the remaining ensemble of characters yet to be introduced would have been introduced in a much more rapid succession. The audience might have been overwhelmed with the introduction of characters and plot. With the pre-title sequence, the audience is given the chance to relax and have a firmer grasp of the beginning of the film. Wright considered this and agreed, liking the idea that the first scene would now be a prologue. That's cool. The band Mad Trick recorded two versions of their song Black Sheep. One had the vocals of lead singer Emily Haynes, which was included in the soundtrack. The other version included Brie Larson's vocals, which became a fan favorite and was used in both the film and in the promo music video. However, the latter version was nowhere officially available. But due to the popularity, the version containing Larson's vocals was later added in a 10th anniversary edition of the film's soundtrack, which was released in June 2021. That version became such a hit that it brought Larson back to the Billboard charts for the first time since 2005. And then lastly, the anime Netflix series Scott Pilgrim Takes Off came out in November 17th, 2023, which was developed by Bryan Lee O'Malley and Ben David Grabowski. The 2010 cast returned, and Edgar Wright was an executive producer. Now, at the time, yeah, I saw that show. I enjoyed it. I would say myself. For me, what I didn't like was it was essentially a rehash of the first movie. I felt they should have just came up with another storyline, to be honest. But I would say otherwise, it was worthwhile to watch as a TV series. And unfortunately, Netflix canceled the show, so it only lasted for one season. So, lastly, should this movie be rediscovered? I say absolutely yes. It's one of those movies where you'll have fun with it. If you love Edgar Wright's works, you'll definitely enjoy this one. And even though it might not be for everybody, but I would say check it out and see it. So as mentioned in Tenet, don't try to understand it, just feel it. There's that. So that pretty much concludes this episode of the podcast. So you can find me on Instagram, X, YouTube, and Linktree at Nomfanelo. You can find the podcast on Instagram, X, YouTube, and Linktree at RD Movies Pod. If you want to support the podcast, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/RD Movies Pod to donate. On Spotify app, you can answer the future poll, leave a comment, and rate the podcast. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review and rate the podcast. And you can submit questions, comments, and suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com, to be featured on the after show, which will air after the season finale. So I want to say thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to catch you on the next one.